Hello, and welcome to the Neurology Nuts and Bolts podcast, a podcast all about constructing your career in neurology. I'm your host, Parneet Grewal, Assistant Professor of Vascular Neurology at Medical University of South Carolina, Charleston, South Carolina. And today we are going to be talking about the art and science of mentorship with Dr. Tanya Turan and Dr. Feghali-Bostwick. Dr. Turan is a professor of neurology and vice chair of faculty affairs at MUSC. Throughout her career, Dr. Turan has been a mentor to innumerable trainees and junior faculty and was also founder of Women in Neuroscience group at MUSC. Dr. Feghali-Bostwick is an endowed chair for scleroderma research, distinguished university professor, and director of the Center for Advancement, Recruitment, and Retention of Women in Science at MUSC. She also recently won the MUSC Peggy Schacht Research Mentor Award. Thank you to our listeners for joining us, and thank you for taking the time to speak with us today, Dr. Turan and Dr. Feghali-Bostwick. In recent years, mentoring in medicine has become increasingly common as a strategy to support development of clinical, professional, and personal welfare. It can be conceptualized in various ways depending on the context and its purpose. In today's talk, we are going to provide perspectives on and to learn about mutually beneficial, considerate, and collaborative mentoring relationships and help you understand how to participate in and encourage these relationships in your career. So let's start off with a bit about you, Dr. Turan. Tell us about your experience as a mentee and then as a mentor, and what motivated you to start the Women in Neurology group at MUSC.
Hey, Parneet, thanks so much for having me. When I was a trainee, I really had no idea that I needed a mentor or didn't know anything about what mentorship was. But I was fortunate that when I was a fellow, I actually had a woman faculty member from my institution pull me aside and say, we need to go to lunch. And she took me to lunch and said, if you want to have an academic career, you need to know the promotion criteria. You need to know what it takes to get ahead. And it's never too early to know about that. And that really opened my eyes. I was also fortunate to have really great research mentors that were committed to helping me meet my career goals as long as I worked hard and made smart choices. I started because I feel like women in an academic setting really have unique needs. And there was a really strong need for women in our neurology department to connect and to really just boost each other up. It was initially more of kind of a quasi-social function or group, for networking and support. But over time, it really evolved to have some more formal programming that really added to the social events to get a dialogue going and became much more driven by the resident group, which was great because then they could bring up issues that they felt like were most relevant to them.
Thank you, Tanya. What about your experiences, Dr. Feghali-Bostwick?
Early on, my mentor, when I was a postdoctoral fellow, my mentor left the institution that I was at, and I stumbled for a while because I wasn't sure what to do next. Who do you go to? Who do you find as a mentor? And I was very fortunate that there were a couple of faculty who were women who were more senior to me that pretty much offered advice and guidance that had a lot to do with me being able to sort of continue in my career. So as a result, I have focused on launching and leading programs, especially for women, but in general, mentoring programs that would spare others to go through similar experiences and provide some guidance and a roadmap in order for them not to undergo the delays and sort of the struggle that I went through as a mentee, as a trainee.
Thank you. And I believe as trainees, a lot of us do experience faculty changes institutions, and you have that faculty as a mentor. We kind of experience the same stumbling roadblock that you mentioned. So it's good to know that there is light at the end of that tunnel still, and you can connect with more different mentors in addition to being in contact with the mentor that has left. So there are, when you look up in literature and on talking to people, everybody defines mentorship differently. And then there are terms being a mentor or being a sponsor that are kind of thrown around. What is mentorship and what is the difference between mentorship and sponsorship, Dr. Turan?
Well, I think mentorship and sponsorship go hand in hand for many of us. Mentorship to me implies more of a guidance role, whereas sponsorship implies more of a promotion aspect. And I think a good mentor does both for their mentees if they're in a position to do so. So if a mentor is on national committees or is involved with programming for national events, they could be in a position to advocate for their mentee to be a part of, such programming. And so I think it's more of the sponsorship is more of advocacy and promotion, whereas mentorship is more guidance.
That is a very good description of both the roles. Do you have anything to add, Dr. Feghali-Bostwick?
It was perfectly said by Dr. Turan. The only thing I would add is sometimes trainees think that they only need one mentor and the mentor will serve as a mentor, as a sponsor. It doesn't hurt to have different sponsors, because sponsors can open the door for you in different settings. For example, if you have a membership in a particular society that maybe your mentor is not a member of, you would need a sponsor for that society. If you are interested in belonging to a different organization, you need someone to sponsor you. You might identify an even different sponsor for that. Just because you have a mentor doesn't mean you don't need anything else. Your mentor may not be able to do everything for you, and it's good to have a network of sponsors to help you open doors in different settings where your mentor may or may not be present.
A lot of universities set us up with one mentor, but that's good to know that one person kind of cannot serve all the roles and needs that you might have as a mentee. So, $1,000,000 question, how do we find a mentor? What are some of the things that our trainees and junior faculty should look for when they are searching for a mentor?
So first, I want to say that you can have more than one mentor for different things, like Carol said. And so for folks who are interested in research, they may have a large mentoring team with different areas of specialty that can help contribute to their research project. But it's also important to have a career development mentor. I think at the very minimum, I'm a firm believer that everyone needs a career development mentor, maybe not when you retire, but pretty much up until then, someone who can help give you those opportunities and steer you in the right direction, help with, conflict resolution, those types of things. I think it's important when folks are choosing a mentor that they do consider potential conflicts of interest. So, I usually tell folks, you might want to be cautious about having someone in a leadership position above you, like your chair or your division director as a mentor, just because they might have some, subconscious biases. For example, if you ask if you should, do more clinical work and they want you to do more clinical work because they're the division director, they might, push you in that direction. But, again, if you have multiple mentors or if you have a strong relationship with a particular individual, then, all of that can be mitigated. So it's also good to ask other junior faculty what experience they've had with some of the faculty as mentors, and also find someone who has the mentoring style that works best for you. Some people have more of a formal mentoring style, want to meet at regularly scheduled intervals. Others view mentorship as kind of a more formal, informal process where, you're meeting for lunch or just talking about things on an as-needed basis. So I think it's important to find the mentoring style that works for you too as a consideration. I've noticed that women do tend to prefer women mentors, but should also keep in mind that for other career development issues, that certainly research mentors who are men or career development mentors who are men can be very knowledgeable and may have access to resources and knowledge that are unique.
Dr. Turan covered it beautifully. I think when you start looking for a mentor, it's important to find someone who has the expertise and experience to guide you. But as we mentioned, they don't necessarily have to know everything and be able to guide you through everything. But I think some key elements that are also essential when you are looking for a mentor, when I think of my relationship as a mentee, but now my relationships as a mentor, I think it's important to find someone you trust, because that person may give you advice that at the time they give it may seem like it's not in your best interest, but it is. So it has to be someone you truly trust. And it has to be someone that will be comfortable giving you honest feedback, because they have to be able to talk to you about everything, even when it's uncomfortable or even when it's something that you need guidance with that you may not have realized you needed guidance with. So I think those are all important. And I guess one last thing I would say, your mentor should be someone who treats you with respect.
Do you think, is there a good mentorship model that universities can follow or should adopt that would fulfill the needs?
Well, as I said before, I'm a firm believer that everyone needs a mentor. And I think that mentorship should be formalized and tracked and evaluated by departments and universities. The actual mentoring relationship can be informal, but the process should be monitored to ensure it's occurring and should be supported by universities. I think most universities recognize the importance of mentoring, but don't have as formal programs, and people who don't know that they need mentoring can slip through the cracks. And so I think formalizing the process is a good way to make sure, and then also evaluating and reevaluating mentoring. One other point to the last topic of, finding a mentor that's somewhat relevant is that if the mentoring relationship isn't working, that's okay. That's not a failure on anybody's part. It's important to remember that you can always switch mentors, and it's not a reflection of anyone's failure. So I think, having a system set up where mentors are kind of more formally identified and there's that flexibility is important for institutions and departments.
Yeah, I completely agree with the flexibility, because I think there's not a one size fits all when it comes to mentoring. It's important to use the mentoring style that works for you and that particular mentee. So you can have formal meetings set up. I do both one-on-one meetings and an open door policy, because sometimes things come up that you may not want to wait till the next meeting for, but not everybody likes the open door policy. So I think there's different ways to do it. But there's also forms of mentoring that don't necessarily involve in-person mentoring. You could do distance mentoring. Ideally, your primary mentor should be available in person, but you could do distance mentoring. And it doesn't always have to be one-on-one. Some of it can be group mentoring. For example, I organize and lead a national mentoring program where the mentors and mentees get together at the same time virtually. And it's sort of a national program, so people can come from any state, from anywhere, and participate, and that works as well. It supplements their institutional mentors' input and gives them an additional cadre of mentors that they can go to, and a quarterly meeting seems to work well. So different mentoring opportunities, styles, and formats depending on the needs of the mentees.
As a mentee, how can someone get the most out of this experience? So once we identify the right mentor or a group of mentors, what are the responsibilities of a mentee?
Well, I think ultimately the mentee needs to come to the table and make sure that they're getting what they need from the mentoring relationship. I always recommend having standing meetings at whatever frequency, monthly, bi-monthly, whatever works, which, can be canceled if there are no active issues to discuss. Otherwise, it's really difficult to add in meeting times ad hoc for, very busy mentors. So if you have a scheduled time, you can really develop a list of issues that you want to discuss. And then, of course, if important things come up in between, mentees should let their mentors know that they have an issue that they need to talk about. I think, it's also important for mentees to be respectful of the mentor's time, recognizing that most mentors have robust academic careers. And, if they can kind of batch some of the questions or, let them know well in advance when they are going to cancel a scheduled mentoring meeting, that's always really helpful. The other side of that is that the mentor is really responsible for being in the moment when the mentor and the mentee do meet. So they really should be focused on the mentee during that time and avoid external distractions and treat the mentee's time with respect as well. And then, of course, the mentor's responsibility is to advocate for the mentee and provide opportunities for career advancement when they can, as we've discussed before.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think one point that I find is important in the meetings with the mentees is we get more out of the meeting if the mentee comes in prepared and if the mentee follows up on the things we talk about. For example, let's say the mentee is drafting a paper and we're trying to figure out which journal would be a good fit. And we talk about 3 journals and about looking up the instructions to figure out which one would be better fit based on the type of data. Then following up, looking up the 3 journals and getting back to your mentor makes it more efficient and allows you to move at the pace that you want to move at. So coming prepared and following up on what is discussed, I think, are things that the mentee can do to enhance the mentoring experience.
Now, kind of reversing my earlier question, so there are innumerable benefits for mentees when you're paired up with the right mentor: improved job satisfaction, personal and professional well-being, and feelings of self-worth. What are the benefits to being a mentor? Why should we all encourage each other to be a mentor to other people, to our peers, to our juniors?
That's a really great question. I think a lot of it's intangible. Most of the benefit of being a mentor really, for me, is psychological. It is an unfunded part of our academic medical careers, but I think many of us are motivated by the feeling like you're paying it forward. If you've had good mentorship, you want to provide mentorship to other people and, get the joy and the pleasure and the pride in your mentees achieving success in their career goals. In some cases, mentors can benefit from increased publications or help on projects, but that should never really be the main goal. I think the relationship is about the mentee's needs. That said, it's always, I think, really nice for mentees to publicly recognize their mentors for their support, whether it's in, presentations or to the chairman or to the mentors themselves. A simple thank you goes a long way to making the mentors feel like what they're doing is making a difference.
I think a lot of us are in academia because we are learners. We want to continue learning for the rest of our lives. We enjoy learning. And I feel that working with different mentees, you learn a lot. So it's a learning opportunity for the mentor as well to gather new perspectives, get to know different people. There's a lot also of self-fulfillment, self-gratification, because you are making a lasting difference by training the next generation, ensuring there's a pipeline of future clinicians, clinician scientists, basic scientists in your field. So I think there's a lot to be said for the satisfaction you also gain from giving back.
Definitely. I cannot highlight the feeling of satisfaction that you get when you work with your mentees, even as a junior faculty, working with residents, working with your resident mentees, and working with your peers as a mentee and a mentor at different times. It has been very fulfilling. What are some of the common pitfalls that we need to avoid in the mentor-mentee relationships, both for mentees and for mentors?
I think for mentees, not being prepared for meetings, as Carol said before, or taking your mentor's time for granted by not being prepared or not following up. Another pitfall would be, constantly ignoring the advice that the mentor gives. Obviously, you don't have to agree with everything, but one surefire way to cause your mentor to feel burned out on the relationship is if you just, don't take their advice ever, or if you're argumentative when they are trying to be helpful. That's not good. Fortunately, that's not common though. So for mentors, I think one of the bigger challenges is not really understanding generational differences, particularly if there's an age difference or a, generational difference between the mentor and the mentee. They might not understand, the priorities of a different generation, and the differences in goals and needs of the mentee. I think it's also important to remember that to not force the mentee to become like a mini me, to not, make them feel like they have to be a little clone of yourself. And I think all feel, not all, but many feel like we want the mentee to achieve the same things we've achieved or meet the same degree of success, but really have to keep in mind that those might not be the goals of the mentee. And you really need to take that into consideration when you're providing advice and counseling.
Thank you. What are some of your thoughts on this, Dr. Feghali-Bostwick?
Dr. Turan covered it beautifully. I mean, there's very little left to say. Maybe additionally to that, I would say one of the pitfalls is if there's a lack of transparency. And when there's a lack of transparency, you risk jeopardizing the trust that's there, and it changes the relationship between the mentor and the mentee. So I'd say just having these open conversations, having the honesty in the conversation is critical for the mentee-mentor relationship to stay a healthy relationship.
Thank you. Those are very important pearls to remember. Another question is, how can mentors address the racial and gender inequity and the implicit or explicit bias that create barriers to advancement for their mentees in academics or in the private world?
It seems to me that there is some good news that I think the climate to at least discuss these issues has improved dramatically over the last couple decades. Still not where it needs to be, but most universities do have offices that focus on navigating these issues. And I think as a mentor, it's really important that we know about the services and programming that the institution offers, so that we can steer the mentee in the right direction. When difficult issues arise, I think it's really important upfront to ask the mentee what are their goals for getting the issue resolved, and respect that. Some mentees may not feel comfortable reporting things to, kind of higher up institutions or higher up offices within the institution. And sometimes it's just important to listen and not push them to make a big deal out of something. But I'm sure Carol has a lot more insight into this.
I think this is not just for mentors, but for everybody. I would say for everybody. Part of it is education, right? We all need to be educated on the topics, but also we all need to be able to have the open, honest conversations in a setting where we all feel safe. But in general, if you witness issues of this sort, I think it's up to us to speak up to bias, and it's up to us all to come up with solutions to address it. So I think there are different ways at different levels depending on the situations. Are you trying to just learn about potential scenarios and situations and how you'd be able to address them, or are you facing a situation? And in that case, the strategy and the approach would be, what is the solution? How do we address it? And how do we rectify things?
I think, Carol, you touched on a good point there too, about essentially being a good role model on these issues. And that's one thing that, you can't change other people's behavior all the time, but you can always control your own behavior. And as mentors, I think it is up to us to be role models and making sure that publicly we, discuss the importance of these issues and advocate.
Definitely. I think as people in healthcare, both as mentees and mentors, to addressing these issues and advocating for these issues is of paramount importance. So, Dr. Turan, for our listeners who are neurology trainees and junior faculty, both in roles of clinician educator as well as clinician researchers, what are some of the tips that you would give to your mentees for career advancement?
So I think it's super important to really be proactive and to put yourself out there and to ask for help and advocacy, even from people at other institutions or people, as Carol said earlier, that aren't necessarily your mentor. Really volunteering for projects and opportunities is critical to building your reputation, which is needed for promotion. Another just little tip I have is at national meetings, I think it's good for at least one day to ask your mentor if you can spend the day with them and have them introduce you to people, because networking is really key. And, it's not asking your mentor too much if they're at the meeting too, to just tag along. And you can also discuss some of the presentations that you're viewing together and things like that. But that networking and advocacy is really important to building reputation and getting your name out there. For researchers, I think it's really important to build, as I mentioned before, a team of mentors to help with both research issues and career development issues.
One key point I tell all my mentees in general is perseverance. No one said it was going to be easy, but this is what you chose to do. You chose it because you're passionate about it, you enjoy it, and the key to succeed is to persevere. So just keep that perseverance as a one word in mind. That is the key to success.
Parneet, I would put it back to you too, because you've done such a fantastic job with building your own career at this point. What tips do you have? You seem like you've kind of written the book on how to get out there.
Thank you. It might seem that way, but I think I, as a lot of people in medicine and in general, struggled with putting myself out there and was encouraged to do that by my mentors. So it was by having good mentors who would encourage me to apply for things and just get over my fear of failure and just to persevere that, if I don't apply for it, I'm never going to get it. So I think that has been very, very helpful. And still, if I am considering applying for something, my mentors back in residency or here at MUSC, they've always been like, go for it, So I think that has helped me a lot. And then coming back to your point, Tanya, about networking at meetings. As a resident, we were always told to network. You apply for a leadership course or you go to a meeting and we're applying for fellowship and we were told to network with potential future program directors. But nobody actually really taught us what that meant and how to network. And as an international medical graduate, that was very new for me in a new environment. So I think that was a very helpful tip that you should ask your mentor for it and tag along with your mentor for this and see if they can introduce you to people.
I was just going to add quickly to the networking. It's important to have a mentor who helps you network, but I think peer-to-peer mentoring and networking is also key. If you are at a meeting and you're there with a colleague of yours who's you're both residents, let's say you're at a meeting and you go up and meet someone that your mentor recommended you meet, it's also good to introduce your colleague and say, oh, we're residents together. This is so-and-so. Their research interest is XYZ. So I think there's a lot also that can be done peer-to-peer in the mentoring process and the networking process.
That's a great point, Carol. I also agree you don't need to have your mentor do it. It's always nice if it's someone who's, if your mentor is someone who's nationally recognized and knows a lot of people. but it's perfectly acceptable to go up to, quote, famous people in your field and introduce yourself and say, hi, my name is Dr. So-and-so, and give them your spiel, the elevator speech on, what the 2-minute elevator speech, I think it's called, that describes what your research interests are and comment about aspects of their career that you admire, particularly if it's someone that you think you're going to be looking for help from in the future. But basically saying, hey, Dr. So-and-so, I'm really interested in your research. This is what I do. And would it be okay if I email you after the conference and set up a time to meet to discuss things further? I don't know anybody who's going to say no to that. I mean, they might be a little taken aback because I feel like people don't do that often. But, I've had folks do that to me at conferences, approach me at conferences. And some of those folks I have a longstanding research mentoring relationship with. So it certainly doesn't hurt. And it gets to your point too before about if you don't try, you're not going to succeed.
This was very helpful, and I'm sure I'm going to implement some of the tips in my future mentoring relationship. So lastly, before we finish, any key takeaways from today's conversation that you guys would like to provide? What do you think our listeners should take away from our podcast today, Dr. Turan?
I think in summary, mentoring is a really critical part of career advancement, and you absolutely need a mentor. No one succeeds totally on their own. And it's really important to set up a mentoring team that becomes invested in your career and your success.
What about you, Dr. Feghali-Bostwick? Do you have any key takeaways?
If you don't have a mentor, find one, or even find more than one.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Turan and Dr. Feghali-Bostwick. This was very helpful. Neurology Nuts and Bolts podcast was created and produced by Sarah Schaefer. This podcast is not recorded as an official podcast of any institution or organization. The podcast is unfunded. Opinions are those of the individual participants. Music is by Audrey Nath, artwork by Shivani Ghoshal. Want more content like this? Be sure to subscribe to Neurology Nuts and Bolts podcast wherever you get your podcast to hear more about constructing your career in neurology. Follow us on Twitter at NeuroBolts and on Facebook at Neurology Nuts and Bolts to stay up to date on new content and give us feedback on what you want to hear and tell your friends. Thanks for joining us.